I would like to introduce the first panelist, and that is Jay Coghlan. He will be speaking about nuclear weapons cleanup. Jay Coghlan is Executive Director of Nuclear Watch of New Mexico. That's www.nukewatch.org. It's a Santa Fe-based group that tracks the Los Alamos National Laboratory and related issues in the Southwest. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Jay.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Glad to be here at high noon. The first plug I'll put in, given that there's only 6 minutes and I'm starting my timer, by the way, here we go. So can't cram it all in 6 minutes. So I want to recommend to you all our website, which is simply nukewatch.org. And you can find a lot of stuff on there about the stuff that I'm going to talk about. And, you know, first of all, my salutations to TAOS. I have a number of ties there. My partner's a wonderful woman from TAOS, and I ski at TAOS. I'm a pretty avid skier. And the reason I'm invoking that right now is kind of on my commutes to Taos Ski Valley, try and grab the powder days, but trying to make that commute time worthwhile. I've been listening to an audiobook of People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. And I want to recommend that. I read it 40 years ago, but it's good to hear it again. And given the context of the times, to realize again that our great country was built on slavery, genocide, and economic suppression. But to make it relevant to today, I'm almost done with it. I'm in the McCarthy era and the Cold War era. And what's being documented were the false bomber gaps and missile gaps that were being used as an excuse for accelerating the nuclear arms race and for having, you know, massive, overwhelming overkill in the American nuclear weapons stockpile. And I want to draw some eerie parallels to today. You know, we've long lost the possible peace dividend from the end of the Cold War. And we're in, the United States is in a new $2 trillion so-called modernization plan that will be a complete extreme makeover of our nuclear forces. And about 1/3 of those costs are going to the Department of Energy labs, 2 of which we have in New Mexico, and to the production complex. The other 2/3 is going to the Defense Department for completely new missiles, subs, and bombers. So this is like deja vu back to the future. To date myself, I grew up, you know, in the Cuban Missile Crisis, et cetera, and we're going right back there. And, you know, I'm no fan of Putin or of the Chinese president, Xi Jinping. I personally know Russian activists that have been persecuted by Putin. In China, of course, I go all the way back to Tibet and Tiananmen Square, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'm no fan of those 2 countries, but they're being used as an excuse for the US modernization program right now. And then to bring this to our own backyard, that backyard being the Los Alamos National Laboratory, I'm reaching for some testimony that the commander of Strategic Command gave just on Tuesday to Senate Armed Forces. And this is Admiral Richards. But to quote him, and again, he's testifying to Senate Armed Services, quote, plutonium pit production is the biggest stockpile modernization issue that we have. And he goes on to say that the plutonium pits in our stockpile are more than 50 years old and well past their design lives, and that we can't study our way out of this problem. Well, I can tell you, and I'm being charitable here, those are falsehoods. that he gave as formal testimony to the Senate Armed Services. And of course, he's making a big pitch for those $2 trillion. But pits, in fact, are on average below 40 years of age. And further, independent experts have concluded that they last at least a century, and there is no prescribed end date. I should back up just a little bit and explain that pits, I once went to Russia with a fact sheet that was translated by a professor down at UNM, but she mistranslated the word pit as a hole in the ground or a shaft, and it's not that. I looked up to a very puzzled Russian audience, but a pit in this case is like the pit of a peach, and it is the core and critical, pun intended, critical component of nuclear weapons. And industrial scale pit production was shut down by the FBI when they raided the Rocky Flats plant near Denver in 1989 for environmental crimes. So Los Alamos is the original site of pit production, and that mission was relocated to Los Alamos. But the federal government's current proposal is to have simultaneous plutonium pit production at both Los Alamos and also the Savannah River site in South Carolina. So on Tuesday, my organization, Nuclear Watch New Mexico, along with our colleagues, Savannah River Site Watch in South Carolina and Tri-Valley Cares in California, we filed a notice of intent to sue the Department of Energy over this because they haven't conducted required public review and comment as required by the National Environmental Policy Act. Now, some of you may know the Los Alamos Study Group. The reason I invoke them right now is they have already attacked us on this for filing this notice of intent to sue. So I want to be clear what our intent is we are trying, first of all, to enforce existing law, that is the National Environmental Policy Act, to give citizens the right, their inherent right, to comment on major federal proposals. And then our tactical aim is to keep pit production limited at Los Alamos. That production mission already exists here and has existed since World War II. But the reason that I want that is because pit production will always be inherently limited at Los Alamos because of their own incompetence. And I'm quite clear about that, their own incompetence. The fact that their topography is limited, they have limited flat space. There's cultural barriers to becoming a blue collar factory, et cetera, et cetera. My fear is that if pit production is established at Los Alamos, or excuse me, at Savannah River site, then they'll be able to go back into industrial scale nuclear weapons production and fuel the arms race. So because of time, I'm going to have to leave it at that. I was advertised as also addressing cleanup. I'll be extremely brief. Cleanup is so poor at Los Alamos that the State Environment Department recently sued the Department of Energy to get out of a consent order that governs cleanup at Los Alamos. To put this in context, for this fiscal year, DOE proposed to raise LANL's nuclear weapons programs by a third to $2.9 billion, while proposing to cut cleanup by half. So that gives you a perspective on that. And then leaving with a to-do for what people in TAOS could do, an action item. Two great things would be to get both your town council and your county commissioners to convince them to get out of the regional coalition for LANL communities, which is just a shill for DOE, and attempts to promote cleanup on the cheap like they did at Rocky Flats. And then finally, to get both your county commission and your town council to pass a resolution like Santa Fe City and county councils have already done for a new site-wide environmental impact statement. So I'm sorry, I already went, I think 3 minutes over time, and I'll have to close there. But thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jay. It was really illuminating and something close to home for the TAOS Film Festival and the people who are listening in here from Northern New Mexico. With that, I wanted to introduce our next esteemed guest is Cynthia Lazaroff, and she will be speaking about US-Russia relations, the quest for stability. She also is executive producer of the film that is an official selection of the film festival, My Awakening to Today's Nuclear Threat. The film is the dawn of a new Armageddon, and I probably have that a little bit wrong, but in any case, she'll be talking about the Hawaii false alarm, the role of women, and she is the founder of Women Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy and Nuclear Wake Up .Earth. She is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, and she also is engaged in track 2 diplomacy with Russia and has founded the groundbreaking US-Russian exchange initiative since the early 1980s. And I apologize about the introduction on the film. I give it to you, Cynthia. Welcome.
Thank you, Jean. I'm so honored to be here with you and everyone today. So after the Cold War ended, I thought I could stop worrying about nuclear war, and I went off to work on coral reefs and climate change. All of this changed for me in 2017 when I was making the film US-Russia Relations, Quest for Stability, and interviewed dozens of top experts in the US and Russia on nuclear dangers. Pretty much everyone awakened me to today's staggering nuclear danger. The two who had the greatest impact on me were our former US Secretary of Defense, William Perry, and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Secretary Perry said to me that today we're at a greater risk of a nuclear catastrophe than we were during the Cold War, and that most people are blissfully unaware of this danger. And that because we don't understand the danger, we make no serious attempt to repair the hostility between the United States and Russia, so that we're allowing ourselves to sleepwalk into a catastrophe. And then he said, we must wake up. At that moment, I realized that I'd been sleepwalking since the end of the Cold War. I came home here to Hawaii at the height of the fire and fury between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. And tensions were particularly high here because we knew that we had been marked on Pyongyang's map of nuclear death. And we were getting instructions from our government about how to prepare for a nuclear attack and how to survive a nuclear attack. With all of this present in my awareness, I was one of over 1 million people across the Hawaiian Islands who all got this message on our cell phones: ballistic missile threat, inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter, this is not a drill. After getting confirmation from a journalist that our county government was telling us to take shelter, I spent the next 38 minutes trying to prepare my family to survive a nuclear attack. Where do you go? What do you take with you? Where are your loved ones? Can you get to them? How many minutes do you have? Who do you call to say goodbye? For me, it was my daughter in LA. And as I was racing to shelter in a cave, I called her and said, Mackenzie, we've all gotten this message on our cell phones that we're going to be hit by a nuclear missile. And I just want you to know that I love you. And she said, Mom, I love you too. At that moment, time stopped for me. I didn't want to let her go. I thought, will I ever see her again? I thought, is this one nuclear missile from North Korea, or is this many nuclear missiles coming from Russia to us and going back from us to them? Is this the beginning of one of those accidental nuclear wars that Secretary Perry and so many of the other experts are so worried about? Is this the beginning of the end of life as we know it, of everything and everyone we know and love and cherish on this earth? This experience now lives inside of me as a mother, as a human being. It's in my gut. And it's never going to go away until we eliminate nuclear weapons. I have no illusions about the formidable obstacles in the way of achieving this, but we can start by waking up to what's at stake and acting to prevent a civilization-ending nuclear war before it's too late. As I walked back onto my farm after those 38 minutes, I got a clear message: you need to do something. You need to share this. So my moment-to-moment experience is chronicled in Dawn of a New Armageddon, published in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists on Hiroshima Day. It includes the nuclear playbook, 10 steps inspired by Gorbachev, Perry, and other experts that we must take, absolutely must take, to reduce the risk of a nuclear catastrophe and move towards a world without nuclear weapons. On the same day, I founded nuclearwakeup.call.earth, where we focus on awakening to action, reducing the nuclear risk, and abolishing nuclear weapons. Much of our work is with the US and Russia, because as the two countries that possess over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, it's up to us to take the lead in reducing our arsenals. China has made it clear that they will not consider reductions until the US and Russia come down to their level. We work to restore a dialogue with Russia to reduce the risk of blundering into a nuclear war by accident, miscalculation, or mistake. Today, despite deep differences in the high toxicity in US-Russia relations, we must decriminalize diplomacy and start talking to Russia again about nuclear risks. It's omnicidal behavior to stop talking to your nuclear adversary, and we fail to talk to Russia about nuclear risk at our own peril. We work through education, citizen diplomacy, cultural exchange, and film. One of our first projects was Morning Armageddon, an entry at the festival, which was shot in a nuclear bomb shelter in Moscow. Hawaii artist and activist Makana joined us as the first Americans to descend into this haunting nuclear bunker. When we got down there, it was devastating. I was physically ill. And then out of the silence, Makana just started to sing. Morning Armageddon just spontaneously poured out of him. There was no plan for this. It was breathtaking to witness. So what you see in the music video is art being created in the overwhelming emotion of the moment, on the spot, in real time, all in one take. In citizen diplomacy, we ask ourselves, what could be game-changing? What can open hearts change minds? Imagine Indigenous peoples from the US and Russia gathering in the Bering Strait in a ceremony for peace and climate justice. Imagine the American and Russian people partnering in a moonshot moment to plant 1 trillion trees, which climate scientists say would reduce CO2 by 25% and could be game-changing for the climate. Imagine women and girls all over the world awakening to action and claiming our seats at the table to abolish nuclear weapons. Excluding women, half of the human race, for much of the nuclear age has brought us to the brink of possible extinction. Today, it's an existential imperative that women come forward to join the company of men and lead the quest to eliminate nuclear weapons. This is why we've started Women Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy, and these are the kinds of citizen diplomacy initiatives we're working on right now. We're excited about the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons this year by ICANN and Don't Bang on the Bomb's divestment campaign to compel the nuclear armed states to adopt and ratify the treaty. It's time for people around the world to divest from nuclear weapons and eliminate the threat of nuclear war. Then we can redirect the trillions spent on nuclear weapons and militarism into addressing the existential threats of climate change, the pandemic, and all the other issues that are so urgently calling for our attention. We have to remember what's at stake. Our lives are at stake. Your life, my life, our children's lives, all of our lives are at stake. Even if less than 0.5% of our nuclear arsenals are used, this would mean the end of civilization. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was brilliant.
Honored.
You're a model.
No, I'm putting some links in the chat for everyone, but I'm really grateful and honored to be here. Thank you. It's really an honor.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you. And with that, because we must move on, I wanted to introduce Elke Duerr. She will be speaking today about staying peaceful in a changing world. Elke Duerr is a binational interspecies communicator, filmmaker, author, visual and oral storyteller, photographer, and workshop presenter, founder of the Web of Life Foundation, or the acronym WOOF. Her work has been screened and exhibited internationally. She spends half of the year camped out in the wilderness with the animals and wild nature and has many stories to share. Her approach is reciprocity, reciprocal relationships with all life on this planet. It is my pleasure to introduce Elke, who has an official selection, a film called Story of Wolves in the film festival. It's all yours, Elke.
Thank you so much for having me, Jean. I'm really thrilled to be here today. And this is a great segue into my talk from Cynthia's talk, because let me get started here on my 6 minutes, so I won't take too much time. So I grew up at the border to East Germany during the height of the Cold War, and with machine gun fire every night and tanks rolling through our fields, because I come from an organic farm. And basically in high school, they told us, don't worry what you're going to be, because we're going to die first. And it's just a matter of when we have World War III, not if. But I never believed that. I always rode my bike along the border with border guards pointing their guns at us and laughing, having Uzis pointed at me at the age of 6 or 7. Anyways, I always stood there and I thought, no, the people on the other side, they love life as well. We won't have this anymore. It's enough now, because I could feel it in my family members and community members. They were really sick of war, thousands of years of war. We sometimes had 100 years of war or more, 30 years of war. It just went on and on and on, and I couldn't believe it as a kid. So I always stood there and I thought, no, this is going to end. This is going to end. This is going to end. And lo and behold, I wasn't that old when everything came down peacefully, because then the next thing was, if it ever comes down, then many people will have to die. But that wasn't the case. And now the area where the tanks were rolling around and where they had taken away the land from the farmers to have more of a bigger area for military training purposes, now that is a nature sanctuary where the tanks used to roll around, where we would find black powder shells, where we would find all kinds of debris from war-playing games, is now an area where even some endangered species came back. So there is hope. And this is my approach to life as well, not to focus in so much on what doesn't work, but to look at what does work. So this leads me fast forward to being here in the States. I've been an American citizen for quite a while, and I've spent all my adult life here in the US, because I always told my parents, when I'm old enough, I'm going to leave and I'm going to live where there's wolves and where there's bears and wild animals. And I'm going to do something for them and work with them. And this brought me to New Mexico, where I became very much acquainted with one of the medicine people in one of the pueblos. And she made me basically normal. She said, oh, you talk to animals, you love animals, you're totally connected to nature. Yes, we are too. So you're not such an oddball anymore. You are who you are, and nature really needs somebody who's connected. So when I first came here, I came to New Mexico. I traveled all around the country to look for a place to call home. And I ended up in New Mexico, and I started backpacking in the Gila. And there we used to have wolves, the Mexican gray wolves. And, but the settlers, didn't like them very much, because they were in the binary way of being, not in the reciprocal way of being with all life, but in the binary, either cattle or wolves, either weeds or vegetables. They didn't see the use in having predatory animals. So they all got killed off, but 7 of them in the wild and a few in captivity. And that was the state of being when the Endangered Species Act got signed into law. So basically, at that moment, the wolves were protected, and they started breeding them again in captive breeding programs. And I would say they're called non-essential experimental, because it's such a small gene pool and such a small, very highly specialized population down there, because it's not the same wolf as up north. You can't just put the same wolf in a different area. They're not furniture, and they are used to the desert area, so they're smallest wolf. And when I first started working with them and starting on my documentary, Stories of Wolves, the Lobo Returns, I always wrote the love returns, because I felt like to have such a keystone predator in the area was an act of love, because that kind of predator keeps the whole ecosystem healthy, running, and strong. And I just always wrote the love returns, even though it wasn't very easy to start this work. People were still getting death threats at this point. Right now, the wolves are gaining in the hearts of many, and it's much more acceptable to talk about them and work for them. But back then, that wasn't the case. So another great success story, even though they are non-essential, experimental, and subject to a lot of adverse feelings from a lot of people, the love did return. And from 50 wolves, when I premiered the film 10 years ago, now we are up to 186 or 83 now officially. So it is possible. And I feel it's a matter of consciousness. And the more conscious we are of our relations with nature and each other, the more we'll have a chance for animals and plants and ourselves to return to balance. And in closing, I would like to add, it starts with ourselves. The more peaceful we can be inside, and the more balanced we are inside, and the more we come from love for life, instead of anger against another group of people whom we deem to have done wrong, the more we have a chance to create that more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elke. That was lovely. And such a nice, we're just reaching out on so many different points of the environment. And I just offer my thanks to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
With our next guest is Castille Aguilar. And Castille is going to be talking about climate, environmental justice. And Castille has been doing social and environmental justice work for about 9 years now. And she went to school to dedicate her career to advocating and organizing around climate justice and learning how best to center the voices of our most impacted communities. Castille is a YUCA, or Youth United for Climate Crisis Action, which the acronym stands for, and she's the campaign manager of that terrific organization. It was my great honor to present Castille.
Hi, y'all, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. So as Jean said, my name is Castille Aguilar. I have been doing social and environmental justice work since high school. I actually ended up getting involved because one of my friends was in this youth leadership development program. And when they came to my school, I was so excited. That sounded so interesting. Lo and behold, 9 years later, here I am. But today, I want to talk to you a little bit about youth and environmental activism specifically. I ride that line of youth pretty hard. But I grew up here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it's beautiful here, to say the least. I remember when we used to get feet and feet of snow in the winter, and our monsoon seasons used to flood the yards. And this year was devastating to see that there was none of that. At least in Santa Fe, we got flurries at the most. We didn't really get any snow. Our monsoon season this year was really dry. And, the youth are coming up into this space where this is what they know. I had somebody visit me this year and they were dumbfounded that we didn't get that much snow, because in the past, that's all I had talked about was, oh my gosh, we got so much snow this year. And this is super problematic, to say the least. And a huge problem, specifically in New Mexico, is really our toxic relationship to these oil and gas industries. And the youth have really been leading a lot of this work on climate justice here in New Mexico, and specifically pushing for a just transition out of oil and gas and into renewable energy and more economically viable alternatives for the state of New Mexico. Biden recently put a federal pause on new fracking leases. And we saw this year, not only during our legislative session, where we had a boom of climate policy that was introduced and got tabled or ended up dying in committees or never heard. But we also saw from our governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, write Biden a letter basically saying, we've done so well in our carbon neutrality and renewable investment for our state that we deserve to basically get credits for this. And in turn, we should be waived from this ban on new fracking leases. To put it into perspective a little bit, in 2018, New Mexico produced 2% of the nation's coal, coming primarily from the San Juan Basin. And also in 2018, New Mexico produced 6% alone, just New Mexico, of the nation's oil and gas. And that all primarily came from the Permian Basin. The Four Corners has one of the dirtiest and cheapest coal plants in the world. And we are asking for an exemption on new fracking leases. New Mexico is so aggressively tied to this industry that it is inhibiting how we think of transitioning away into a cleaner future for our youth, our communities, and our state. New Mexico is beautiful. People come here year-round to visit. We have tourism in the winter for skiing and hiking. And in the summer, we have tourism we have wonderful national parks here. We have amazing mountains. Our outdoor space is phenomenal. But it's not always gonna be this way. We need to start realizing the importance of what that transition can look like. We need to also make sure that we are deferring and centering the voices of our most impacted folks, the folks that are left out of these discussions, our Black, Indigenous folks of color, our youth. They need to be in the decision-making spaces. And it was so exciting this year to see one of our own, Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland, be put into a position of power and to be really raised up into this space by somebody who, talks about climate mitigation and what that can look like. It was a perfect person to really put in that role. And it was an honor for New Mexico to have had her first, and to have been able to experience and be able to understand what that looks like for New Mexico. And now she's doing it on a national level. But that is a great example of deferring and centering a voice that has experienced this firsthand. We need to make sure that we're looking for leadership from the original stewards of this land and making sure that we're deferring to the folks that know, quite honestly, more than we do, because they have been doing this work for so long already. A lot of us are just babies to this work. Yucca, for example, has only been around for a couple of years, and make it a point to defer to the leadership of our Indigenous communities particularly, and the work that they have already done, and how we can continue to support that work. And then the last thing that I really want to say is, you know, when we talk about environmental justice work, a lot of what is left out is social justice, but they are the same. Whoever separated them had no idea what they were doing, because they are exactly the same. You don't get social justice without environmental justice, and vice versa. And with places like the Permian Basin and the San Juan Basin, those are Indigenous territories over there. Those are Indigenous communities that are bearing the brunt of the impact of oil and gas and coal and the basic climate issues. And that includes things like spills from fracking waste. That includes air pollution and water pollution of their own resources on their own land. And so also just making sure that we're acknowledging that you can't have one of those without the other. And thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I very much appreciate the many areas that you covered, and it is very impressive and deep. And the issues here in New Mexico are pretty overwhelming, yet we have so much of a chance to go forward. So with that, I want to apologize. Because I was trying to fit all the bios on one page, I accidentally didn't have a space between our next presenter, who was supposed to have come before. And this is Sari Jensen, and she's one of my Climate Reality Corps leaders, also of Northern New Mexico. She will be speaking today about how to benefit the local climate and your yard. And she is, as I had mentioned, a Climate Reality Corps Northern New Mexico leader trained under Al Gore. She's an environmental journalist and a retired teacher of gifted children and students. So with that, it's my great honor to present Sari.
Thank you, Jean. We've heard a lot of big things that can be done, and we need to do the big things. But we also need to be doing the small things for ourselves, for our yards, and for our local climate. There are many actions and choices that you can do. Some will benefit your utility bills, some will feed you, and almost all of them will make you feel better about your efforts. So here goes. The first item, if you are a homeowner, you need to plant a deciduous tree, if you don't have one, in your west and east facing windows. Southeast would be best. Be sure to plant the tree at least 10 feet away from the foundation so you don't end up moving that foundation, and do your due diligence and research. Do make sure that you are planting an appropriate tree, climate appropriate and drought resistant for us here. And always try to plant native trees if possible. Check the amount of root spread. And also check with your utility department to make sure you don't have to get permission first. In the summer, the tree's leafy canopy is going to give you shade and will reduce up to 5% your cooling costs. In the wintertime, the sun can shine through those bare branches, and again, you can reduce the cost of heating. So the tree saves you in many ways. It also, if you remember basic science, it ends up taking in the carbon dioxide and giving you oxygen, good clean air to use. And the improved air quality is a benefit. There are some organizations and municipalities that are working on that, especially here in Albuquerque. Mayor Keller has partnered with Tree New Mexico, a nonprofit, and they are planting trees in the lower income neighborhoods and seeing some great results, and they are continuing that effort. If you are an apartment dweller, there are also options for you. There are many miniature and small trees that grow very well in containers. In fact, a favorite of mine is a lemon tree, and that will give you glorious blossoms and a lot of lemons. So that's a good one to use as well. There are the added benefits, of course, of being able to move the plant if it's on casters so that you put it in the best appropriate place for the climate and the sun at that point. In Europe, there's been, over the last 10 years, something called verticale bosque. It's the vertical forests. And we can adapt that concept. It's where they plant any kind of plant along the side of a building and in the balconies, and small trees and shrubs and plantings on those balconies and along the sides will give you a noise buffer from traffic. It gives you some privacy, lower utility cost because you've got some shade from the sun. And it also gives you cleaner air. There's only benefits, no negatives to it. So if you want to see something fascinating, go online and check out Verticale Bosque in Milan. Remember, there are other plants, small plants that you can use also for decor and for food. Marigolds and chrysanthemums have another use because they are beautiful, but bugs do not like them. They don't like the scent and the oil. So plant a few by your entrance or put them in some pots and you'll have fewer bugs. Lilacs, if you have the space, will attract bees and butterflies. And all of them, all plants help you through photosynthesis. The carbon dioxide, CO2, obviously is separated into carbon for energy, and then you have your oxygen. But there are some other very common pollutants that are in most homes, such as carbon monoxide and benzene and formaldehyde. But there's a wonderful plant family that is excellent at cleaning those pollutants out of your home. And that's the philodendron. And almost any of your dendrons will do that. But be aware, if you have cats, don't let the cat near them because they are toxic to cats. When you're thinking about your plants and fertilizers, please don't think about nitrous oxide. Think about coffee grinds and vegetable peels and natural elements that are actually much better for the plant and for us. Nitrogen fertilizers, which should never be used, are horrific for our atmosphere. A recent issue of Nature published a research study from East Anglia University and noted that nitrous oxide, N2O, is 300 times more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. Nitrous oxide stays in your atmosphere for almost 100 years. That's far longer than CO2. Chemical pesticides and herbicides can be replaced with organic solutions. Some dish soaps kill aphids. Ladybugs eat aphids. Many plants are noxious to pests, and remember the marigold and the chrysanthemum, that takes care of that area. Do your environmental and climate research so that you can see the best natural solutions for your environment. And a final, what can I do, is for homeowners, and it's more like, what shouldn't I do? Do not put down a plastic ground cover and then cover it with all those lovely white stones or gravel. The ground cover, the plastic, prevents any water from getting back into our aquifer. We need that water. And then, of course, the white and gray gravel heats up and the moisture will be evaporated before it even has a chance to come down to our aquifer. If you have downspouts that are positioned over your driveway, reposition them so that they are over planting beds and earth so that they don't wash away your car pollutants and any chemicals that are in your drive. Collect water with a rain barrel. What can you do? How does this help you? Well, let's see. If you do reduce, reuse, and recycle, you have a lot of ways that you're helping. One reusable bag saves 783 plastic bags. One reusable bottle, 83 plastic bottles in a year. One reusable cup, 1,256 disposable cups. And one reusable straw saves you 295 plastic straws, along with their wrappers. Keep in mind, most average Americans create 4.5 pounds of trash a day. So small things work. Enough of us doing them make a huge difference. And I'd like to say thank you very much for inviting me to be here.
Thank you so much, Sari. That was brilliant to have that coming from the ground up. approach to everything. So I applaud your efforts, and I'm grateful that you're putting it out in the newspapers as well. So with that, I would like to introduce our next esteemed guest, Ray Matsumiya, and he will be speaking about Hiroshima, resilience, and climate change. And with a mother from Hiroshima, Ray is deeply committed to unofficial diplomacy and cross-cultural exchanges and peace building. Ray is the director of the Oleander Initiative based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. With a mother from Hiroshima, Ray is deeply committed to this effort of cross-cultural exchanges. Over the past 20 years, he has supervised peace-building institutes for over 3,000 participants in the United States, Spain, Japan, and 9 Middle Eastern countries. These programs have been featured in the New York Times, Boston Globe, USA Today, and PBS via NHK World. Ray has been an invited speaker at TEDx, the Massachusetts State House, the Dayton International Peace Museum, the US Embassy of Tunis, and universities such as the Sloan School at MIT and the Fletcher School at Tufts University. With that, it is my pleasure to present Ray.
Hey, thank you so much, Jane. It's really a great pleasure for me to be here today. Just over 75 years ago, my grandfather became a hibakusha, or a victim of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. And on that fateful morning, he gathered his men, got on his fire truck, and he rushed into that burning city as a first responder. And I just can't imagine the horrors he saw or how he felt during that day. But I do know that it changed him. It changed him forever, both mentally and physically. Physically, just 1 week after he left the burning city, he felt a strange pain in his left eye. And about a week after that, he lost it from the poison that he took in Hiroshima. Mentally, for the next 35 years, his experience in Hiroshima fundamentally changed the way he looked at life. And what it did to him is that it gave him a very deep, deep belief in the power of human resilience. And he saw that resilience in the victims that he treated on August 6th. He saw how tenaciously they clung on to life. And he also saw it in his own community. He saw how the people of Hiroshima somehow got through their trauma, united, and they rebuilt their city even more beautiful and stronger than before. So for him, resilience became his philosophy. And it became the philosophy of many people from Hiroshima. And just to give you an example of how this theme of resilience played out in Hiroshima, when the bomb dropped, the municipal workers of Hiroshima began working furiously. And just one day after 70,000 people were vaporized and the city reduced to a burned plain, they were able to restore water and electricity to many parts of the city. 2 days after the bomb dropped, the bankers that worked at the Bank of Japan in Hiroshima went back to work. They really carefully cleared up 54 bodies of their colleagues, and they made sure that the city could keep moving financially. 1 week after the bomb dropped, the above ground rail cars started running again. And there's so many testimonials saying how much hope that the bells of those trains brought to people that survived. And this is something I find one of the most impressive, is that about a month and a half after the bomb dropped, schools reopened. Even though many of them didn't have books or desks or even roofs. 3 years after the bomb dropped, 50,000 of the 71,000 buildings that were destroyed were rebuilt. And 5 years after the bomb dropped, just 2 miles away from the hypocenter, where temperatures reached the same level as the surface of the sun, the Hiroshima Carp baseball team took the field on opening day in 1950. This is just 5 years after all this devastation. So this idea of resilience, I just find to be amazing. And And what I find also amazing is that the people of Hiroshima not only survived, they thrived. They took all that pain and suffering and they channeled it towards peace. They consciously rebuilt their city in the image of peace to make sure that what happened in Hiroshima would never happen again. It's now known as the city of peace, and it inspires millions of people every year. So I think it's really an amazing example of how people took catastrophe and they transformed it into collective action for positive change. So when it comes to the connection with Hiroshima, resilience, and climate, I think there are two great lessons from Hiroshima that can be applied to climate change. I think the first is pretty obvious. It's the dangers of atomic weapons themselves. The doomsday clock is right around midnight now. And if there's ever a full exchange between America and Russia, it's the end of the world as we know it. Nuclear winter would extinguish most life on this earth. Even if there's a limited exchange, say between India and Pakistan, it would be catastrophic enough to reduce worldwide temperatures by 2 degrees, which would result in really catastrophic crop failures, and millions of people would starve to death. So that's the first lesson of Hiroshima, that whatever happened there cannot be repeated because it's really the end of the earth. The second lesson of Hiroshima that can be applied to climate change is a little bit less known. You know, here in America, the story of the atomic bomb ends with the mushroom cloud in Hiroshima. It's the end of a great race for technologies. It's the end of World War II. But in Hiroshima, the story begins with the mushroom cloud. And I think that this story is amazing and it's not as well known. And as I mentioned before, this story is all about resilience. And just as importantly, it tells the story of using a catastrophe as the impetus for collective action. And I worry that as I look towards the future, 5, 10, 20 years from now, as the challenges of climate change grow bigger and we have more droughts and wildfires and deep freezes and hurricanes and floods, that we'll need to go back to what happened on August 6, 1945, and see how the people of Hiroshima reacted to such adversity and how they came together and were resilient. And not only that, to take the same lead as the people of Hiroshima and use catastrophe as a driver for change, for positive change, to make sure whatever environmental catastrophe that hit us will never happen again. And so those are the ways I see Hiroshima, climate change, and resilience all being tied together. Thanks again, Jean. It was really a great honor to be here.
Thank you, Ray. I really appreciate this talk, and I so appreciated also your webinar that you put on and showing the effects with the visuals that I'm unable to present today, but your presentation is extremely important because you have personal experience with the atomic bomb, and I applaud your efforts. With that, I wanted to go on and introduce, we're running a little behind schedule, with my instructor of World Beyond War, and that is Dr. Phill Gittins. Well, he's PhD, and he is the Peace, Education, and Youth expert of World Beyond War, and World Beyond War's education director. He has 15+ years programming and analysis with leadership experience in the areas of peace, education, and youth. And I think that Phill is beaming out of London, which would be probably around 7 in the evening if that's the case. With that, I welcome my wonderful instructor, Phill Gittins.
Thank you so much, Jean. And I'm going to take 30 seconds of this 6 minutes to do a big shout out to you, Jean, for bringing everybody together. Congratulations. What a wonderful panel. What a wonderful cohort of experts, of activists, of educators that you have with us. So I really want to do a shout out to you for saying what a great job that you've done. So I want to say that out loud. So thank you. And actually, I'm not in London at the moment. I'm actually in Bolivia. So I'm joining you from South America, everyone. So hello, and lovely to meet you all. So I wanted to spend the remaining time talking about the nexus, the intersection between youth, peace and education. And what I want to do is make an argument, but I also want to leave, and I love Sari's kind of very specific advice. I love that. I thought it was great. I want to leave some options open in terms of, well, what can I do with this? How can I get involved with some of these projects or initiatives that you're talking about? So that's what I want to do in the time. So let me start off by making this argument. Equipping young people with the skills, tools, and support to prevent violence and promote peace is one of the largest, most global and important challenges facing humanity. To unpack that, I'm going to talk about why peace, why youth, why education, and then leave with a couple of options for how we can get involved with those three activities. So when we look at peace, we know that peace is fundamental to human progress. We know that research shows that peace has become an essential part, an essential ingredient of social, environmental, political, and economic development. And the United Nations has recognized the interlinkages between peace and sustainable development, in the sense that we can have, and that quote, there can be no sustainable development without peace. There can be no peace without sustainable development. So this is a good news in terms of the interlinkages. The bad news is that we're at a point where we are less peaceful today than any other time in the last 10 years. We are now at a 30-year high, according to research, in violence around the world, and we now have more than 70 million people displaced. The panelists have also highlighted that we're now living in a time where we're faced with two existential threats, not COVID, two existential threats in the sense of nuclear weapons and climate change. And if we don't get those right, there won't be any more of us, moving forward. Hopefully that gives a bit of a perspective on the importance of peace. Now I want to say something about why youth, why we should focus on youth. Well, when we look at peace building, we know that it requires the participation of all ages. So another argument, there can be no viable approach to sustainable peace that does not include young people as positive actors in peace building work. Take, for example, the largest and fastest growing demographic on the planet right now is young people 15 to 25. We now have more young people on the planet than ever before in the whole of history. So if we're not including them as peace builders, we're obviously missing something out. Well, the good news is Gandhi has been saying this along with many others for many, many years. If we want to reach real peace in the world, we need to start with the children. That's the good news. The bad news is that young people have been historically overlooked, and some of the panelists have brought that up as well. To the extent that we now have, in the last 5 years, 3 brand new, groundbreaking, never seen before UN resolutions, which basically say governments and communities and people around the world need to step up their game and prepare young people more to be peace builders, so that we look at them more as actors, as agents, as subjects of change, of peace, rather than what we tend to look at them as victims or perpetrators of violence. So hopefully that gives a little bit of perspective on why youth. When we think about change, when we think about peace, we often think of this idea, or Marx once said that the point of education or point of the world is not to understand it, but it's actually to change it. So it's no good just understanding something, you have to change it. But I actually add to that, and I've argued that, well, you can't actually change something until you understand it. So I think that really justifies the linkages between education and action. The problem is with education is that actually it's and research shows this, is often more of a driver of conflict and more of a driver of violence than it is actual peace. So what we need now is peace education. The good news is on this as well is that following a peace poll in 2018, which surveyed about 100,000 people in 15 countries, from relatively peaceful right up to conflict-affected, war-torn countries, the majority of the people saw, and it came out as number 2 on the list, that peace education is really a critical component of bringing about peace in ourselves, in the communities, and in the world. So that hopefully highlights the importance of peace education. So when I'm talking about peace education, I'm talking about preparing participants, students, learners with the knowledge, skills, attitudes to work towards a culture of peace and away from a culture of violence, which is what we currently have. So hopefully that's give a bit of a perspective in terms of the importance of peace, the importance of youth, the importance of peace education. But here's the question, well, what can we do about it? So I want to use the next kind of couple of 2 minutes to kind of highlight that there's quite a few opportunities for you as participants that can maybe get involved with some of the projects. So Jean knows at World Beyond War, we run very, very good online courses. We've just run one right now, 150 people are on the course. It was called War Abolition 101. Our courses tend to be 6 weeks online. And there was 150 people on that course, right from South Sudan, Syria, right through to US, Canada. And in terms of intergenerational collaboration, I'll have you know, what about this? The youngest, 11, the oldest, 94. How about that? So please get involved with some of our online courses. The next one that we've got upcoming is actually War in the Environment, looking at the interlinkages between war and the environment. And Jing knows, because she's been on many of our courses, it's a really good course. That will start on the June the 7th. Another one, and I'd happily talk about this another time, is a mass project we're working on with World Beyond War and Rotary, and it will be a 10-country project, training youth and communities in 10 different countries around peace building, war abolition activities, etc. But I want to kind of stop there. I could talk a lot more, and we've got upcoming webinars on peace education, upcoming webinars on war and militarism, etc. All of them, by the way, because my passion is for young people, engaging young people. All of them are engaging young people, but also engaging older, other not so young people, because I got an email the other day and it was quite right. And it read something like this: Phill, why are you discriminating against us older people who want to work in the area of peace? And I said, no, this is not the case. What we want is intergenerational work, younger people and not so young people. So these projects are all involved in intergenerational work. So hopefully
that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful, as usual, Phill. And I applaud all of your efforts to bring the youth in. And that is something hugely important, since they're the majority now of our planet as far as demographic goes. And so you might want to put those links in the chat for World Beyond War. So people that want to take the class, I highly recommend the environment and war, or militarism and war class. All of them are excellent. So with that, we have our last speaker. We're running a little bit over, and I am very proud to present a Taosania. We have our first panelist today from TAOS, and she will be speaking about the preservation of public lands. It's Roberta Salazar. And Roberta, an educator and a wildlife biologist, is the founder and executive director of Rivers and Birds, a 501c3 organization based in Taos that has, has led campaigns that have added permanent conservation protections for over 308,000 acres of public lands in Taos County. Rivers and Birds has also taken about 7,000 public school students on learning trips. And I also screened one of the films that Roberta had been behind on the acequias and the important channels of water that bring irrigation to the Taos Valley. So with that, I am with great pleasure present Roberta.
Oh, well, hello, everyone. This is so inspiring and gives me hope to hear from so many wise people who are dedicated to working for peace and to honor life on this planet. And Jean, I want to thank you, especially for all your hard work in bringing this together. It's really important work. Thank you. Thank you all so much. And I also just want to take a few minutes right now to say thank you to the Creator, to this beautiful, magnificent planet that we're on, and to all of our interspecies family members, from the tiniest to the biggest, to the earth, the air, the wind, the fire. What a magnificent journey. And we just ask for empowerment so that we can shift things, so that we can save our planet and honor all life. Thank you. So important. And I think what's really, really important to recognize, and I think most of you are there, but we have to help others, and so many of you are doing that, is to recognize that we're so powerful every individual is so powerful. And I often think about the other members of our natural family. Sometimes I'll wake up and think about the tarantulas in their migration here on the desert in Taos, or the badger, or the elk, the bighorn sheep, the river otter, the earthworms in the soil, all the microorganisms, and how amazing they are that they don't need to hoard and extract and destroy things to live a beautiful life and look quite healthy and beautiful. And so as creatures on the planet, we're very problematic and unique. I got involved in this work. I used to work for the government as a wildlife biologist, and for some reason, time after time, I ended up, even though I was quite shy at the time, becoming a whistleblower or speaking up on work that was actually harming the environment rather than nurturing it in my role as a wildlife biologist. And the last time I actually quit the government, it was many, many years ago, decades ago now, but I went down to the Rio Grande, to the river, and just meditated and thought, what am I here to do? And the answer just came that I wanted to be here on life to help people understand the interconnection of all life. And so I ended up founding Rivers and Birds, and I thought, what a better way to do that than to work with citizens at a very, very young age, where learning is very foundational, and ended up taking children. We really emphasize children from economic backgrounds who otherwise don't have the opportunity, and we immerse them in nature to learn about the interconnection of life by going out onto our beautiful public lands and learning about ecology and the environment and how they can be earth stewards. Then about 10 years ago, I had an opportunity to work on a beautiful area of land to monitor human use, and realized that it was not protected. It was the last unprotected section of our high Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and it had laid forgotten as a wilderness study area. So ended up organizing a campaign, and it was probably, I believe it was the first campaign in New Mexico that was actually led by people of color in a proactive way to protect a very, very important part of our watershed. It was led by our people from Taos Pueblo, our Hispanic land grant people who have been here for hundreds of years, Acequia people, and we had livestock permittees and ranchers who were the powerful voices that came together. A lot of cultural diversity. We also had outfitters and athletes coming in on this, lots of business people, and we united. There was no opposition. Our senators told us there could be no opposition. We had a 100% united request to see that that area was given the highest protection in our nation as a wilderness. That campaign, the relationships developed in that campaign, and the voices that shone were the land-based people who had been here for centuries, who were often overlooked because as land-based people, we tend to be quieter and focus more of our time on nurturing the land in our backyard and our children and growing food instead of going to organizational meetings. We're tending to our relations with the earth every day as we live, but often those voices are overlooked. So the relationships from that campaign led to help empower another campaign that had been in the works for at least a decade. And that was an effort to get roughly 250,000 acres of land protected here in Taos County as Rio Grande del Norte National Monument. And it was truly extraordinary. But we had a good role model here because we have Taos Pueblo, and Taos Pueblo is considered perhaps the most traditional Pueblo in New Mexico. They work very hard at it year-round. The people of Taos Pueblo are performing ceremonies that are very laborious every month, sometimes weekly, to honor all the rest of our family members here on the planet and in our backyard. And they had a very massive part of their land taken from them decades ago by the Forest Service. And they stood up and went to Washington, D.C. almost every year for many decades to request that their land be returned to them. I can't even imagine having the tenacity and never giving up, being told no year in, year out. And finally, Jean, thanks for putting this film festival on Earth Day. When Earth Day was started in 1970, that same year, Taos Pueblo had a major victory where their Taos Blue Lake Wilderness was finally returned to them. And it's just been so, so inspiring. This is very, very important to us all, and it's an important role model for New Mexico and for all of the world, because right now, scientists around the world, inspired by the words of E.O. Wilson and many studies, are saying, you know, here we are on this tiny planet hurling through space and we're destroying everything. We have negatively impacted and severely altered 3/4 of the planet's lands, and we have significantly altered and negatively impacted 2/3 of our oceans. And if we don't turn it around, if we don't protect 50% of the land and 50% of the water on our planet within 50 years, well, many, many living beings and species will go extinct. And so thankfully, the Biden administration has signed the United States on to committing to protecting 30% of the land and 30% of the oceans under the United States by the year 2030. And TAOS has had a really good start in the last, since 2013, we've now protected 308,000 acres of land permanently with some of the highest protections that are given by the federal government. I know right now there's an important campaign to get a designation for one of our major tributaries. The largest river going through New Mexico is called the Rio Grande. And most of our big population centers reside along the Rio Grande. So 2 sections of important waters occur in Taos County, and many organizations are collaborating right now to get an outstanding national resource water designation for the Rio Hondo and also for the Rio Grande in Taos County. So there's so much positive work that needs to be done. We can be overwhelmed to think about all the problems facing us, but I think the better perspective is to think of all the opportunities we have to make positive change right now where it's needed desperately, and at the same time to empower our youth to become extraordinary leaders as well, working alongside all of us. So in Taos County, we're continuing to work together. And I think the beauty of coming together is that we have to take all of our talents and gifts from everyone, from the quietest people and the most experienced who have been connected to the land most deeply. That is super important. It is said that 80% of the world's remaining biological diversity found on Earth right now is found on lands and water that are managed by our wisdom keepers, our indigenous people. And so we really need to shine our indigenous people on the planet as leaders and look to them as role models on how we live on planet Earth. I think COVID has been almost like the immune response of the planet, slowing our economy down, making us more present to the place where we live, the places that we live, and taking time to be with our relations, our families, instead of getting distracted in a million ways by modern technology. So I know that we're running short. I just want to say that everyone's voice matters, and we just need to honor every individual and honor every plant, the intelligence in all plants and animal species on this planet in the most reverent way, and know that we can turn this around and make it intentional every day, every morning when we wake up, that we are here as peacekeepers and to honor life, and to just look at every section of your day and think about how we're going to do that and see it and know that we can make the positive change. And I just thank all of you heroes out there. Aho.
Thank you so much, Roberta. This was a wonderful way to end this session today, and to end it with a view of TAOS and all the incredible diversity and people that we have in this valley. And I should mention that the TAOS Pueblo is a World Heritage Site, and it is a treasure of the world. And I thank you so much for illuminating everyone with our unique space here. I just want to finish off the day with a couple of quotes. One is by Jimi Hendrix. When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. And the other quote is by Wendell Berry. The earth is what we all have in common. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone who participated today and all those who came to listen. This was such a rich experience. I've been listening and participating in a lot of Zoom meetings this year, and I'm very grateful for all of the diversity that you brought and the richness of knowledge. So with that, we'll leave today, and blessings to all.
Thank you. Okay, blessings.
Thank you, blessings. So thank you so much, Jean. It was wonderful. And all of you, you're so amazing and inspiring. This was beautiful.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Mahalo.
everyone. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
So nice to see all these wonderful smiling human beings. Adios.
Yeah.